canonically, there are good Jedi, which are Jedi. There are bad Jedi, which are Sith. A little bit more obscure is the idea of gray Jedi, but nobody in Star Wars really knows for sure. What am I talking about? Well, today we're going to talk about the good things and the bad things, but also kind of the gray things that have shaped our career on this episode of The Learning Geeks, starting now. You with me? No gray Jedi, guys?
There's gray Jedi.
Are there? I don't think canonically.
Well, not technically. I'm trying to think.
So Jude Law has some kind of Jedi-esque capabilities. So he's not Jedi, but...
So now we're getting into Skeleton Crew, which, by the way, we should probably talk about on my other podcast, which is now called Short for a Stormtrooper. Thank you for the prompting, Jake. It is rebranded. By the time this gets out, that is the name of my Star Wars podcast. We invite you all to join. That's all. But yeah, technically, it's come up on things that I look at. It's like, yeah, there's really no gray Jedi.
Technically, no. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
But I do. You could even, someone make the argument that Qui-Gon Jinn had a little bit of a mix between. Yeah. He wasn't always stuck with the view of the good. The good.
He was a little more radical, right? Like,
yeah. Different.
He was light side, but he was tuned into the living for. Okay, let's not.
We'll go to
other podcast. Let's talk about learning, Jake. I'm going to ask you to introduce our topic today. I think it's going to be really fun. So this was your idea, so why don't you share it with our audience?
I hope it's going to be fun. We'll see. But so I have been thinking a lot about mini-me biases. In addition, I've also been thinking about the negative effect of algorithm-based social networks, which basically that is social networks. It's all based on algorithms, but what they do is it's designed to promote thought leaders, experts with the top followers. But the negative effect of that is that you really only see a few of them. It's really like the top percent that typically show up because they have powerful their social networks are very powerful from what they see. So think of the branching in the tree, and you get, I would say you get, the knowledge becomes very monotonous. I'd say among them. Mm-hmm. So I believe as an effective learner, you have to force yourself to branch into various channels or be very cognizant of when you dive into an influencer or some type of popular voice, that knowing that it's just one voice and that voice is quickly duplicated because it's such a powerful social networking tree. So again, it's fine. I do it. We all do it. Everyone follows someone, but you have to be very, very much aware, especially if as from a learning standpoint, to know that it's just that one voice. Makes sense so far?
Yeah.
Like how I started? Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I've been thinking a lot about this topic, and it made me think of a couple Star Wars quotes, which is a complete shocker, that I thought of Star Wars here. But what is a shocker is that I thought of a Rise of Skywalker quote, because FYI, I'm not the biggest fan.
It's not our fave.
It's not a fave of that movie, but it had some moments.
Yep.
It had some moments. And there are two quotes in that movie, which were shared to Rey near the middle and the end of the movie. And then one was from Luke's Force Ghost, and he said, 1,000 generations live in you now. And then later, from Qui-Gon Jinn, somewhere in the netherworld of the Force, his voice appeared, and he said, every Jedi that has lived lives inside you. So great quotes, because I personally believe that it's the pieces that we collect over time that make up the whole of us today. So that's the good, that's the bad, and that's the gray. So it's the variety that I think is necessary for effective learners, and it also creates the uniqueness in each of us. So I asked Bob and Dana to come in with 3 pieces that make up them, either the moments, the experiences, or their people. that helped them develop. And again, one good, one gray, and one bad. So that was the idea, and hopefully you guys all brought something in.
Love it. I have notes on my phone. I'm ready. I'm ready to rock and roll.
So you're ready. Dana, did you bring?
I have some ideas, but I'm not sure they're consistent with what you're thinking. So I might take us down a different tangent. But I'll listen
That's
to Bob
fine.
and see if I can follow on his lead.
The idea is that we all collect different things as we grow, right? There's so many things that make us who we are.
Yeah.
And that's why the idea is like when you just realize that if you listen to just one voice, especially through social networks and so forth, it becomes so repetitive and the sameness and that uniqueness kind of disappears. But if you really think of your effective learning journey, there's been so much that is made of you. So, okay.
I was a little afraid when that I missed the assignment and that what you wanted us to say was like, these are the experts that we listen to. These are the experts that we really don't like. And these are the ones that we're met on. And then I got a little nervous for multiple reasons.
I decided I didn't want to call out people.
It's okay.
That wasn't my thing. Did you bring people to call out? We could make it a passion show.
I didn't, but
you have some in mind.
Well, no. My good example is a person. It's a person. And let me put it this way is as I was thinking about this, the first thought that came to my mind is Mr. Toomey, who was my social studies teacher in middle school.
You talked about Mr. Toomey before.
Well, that's just it.
Yeah.
I was like, I've talked about Mr. Toomey before, and also I have. I talked about Mr. Toomey when I spoke at the ATD conference in Macau last year. So I didn't want to go back to the Mr. Toomey well, but I decided to go back to another childhood teacher who I haven't talked about as much, who is Mr. Murphy.
Okay.
Mr. Murphy was my 4th grade teacher. And he was far and away the most engaging teacher that I had, the most fun teacher that I had. Here's an example of things that he would do is he was really interested in Shakespeare, and he would love to tell stories from Shakespeare's plays to 4th graders, but knowing that 4th graders couldn't really handle sitting down and actually listening to the language of Shakespeare, he would come up with his own retelling of all of the stories. And he would tell us the stories, or he would tell us like, I think he told us like the fall of the House of Usher in kind of a sanitized 4th grade version, but he would share that with us. And it was so engaging. He was such a great storyteller. He also would play these really, really fun learning games with us. So like we would play math football and we would divide up into 2 teams, and it would almost be kind of like a spelling bee for football, a spelling bee for math, but mixed with American football. Mm-hmm. So it would be, if you got the math fact right, you would go forward 5 yards. If you got it wrong, it was a down. And, he would be moving the ball all over the board, the field he had drawn on the board. And that type of thing was really engaging. But the thing that was most engaging was he set up this whole system of, we had a class government. So there were 4 quarters during the school year. Every quarter we would elect a new president, a new vice president, kind of an entire cabinet for the school, or for our class, just for our 4th grade class. And what he had alongside that was this entire economy of points, almost kind of like Harry Potter, if you think about it that way. But it's like,
house points.
Yeah, for everything that we did good, we earned points. For everything we did bad, we would lose points. And then we would vote as a class on how we wanted to spend those points. So we could spend like 100 points to have Mr. Murphy tell us the story of Romeo or Juliet, or like 300 points for a cookie party or something like that. And I learned so much from that experience, just of how the world worked and what it meant to negotiate with people and interact and all of that. It's just amazing stuff. So what I realized in reflecting back on it was, from Mr. Toomey, who I've talked about later, I really learned about experiential learning. You know, he would do these very experiential learning programs, which was great. What I really learned from Mr. Murphy was the importance of engaging as a durable learning feature, and how much more receptive to learning, and how present we all were when it was really, really engaging. So I learned from him to make learning fun, and I learned from Mr. Toomey to make it very experiential, and kind of bringing those two together really helped shape my career as a designer.
Those are good. I like the idea, though. Maybe a piece that I could take away from them, even though they weren't my teachers, is the point structure for some cookies or something. I like
that. Right. You're going to bring that right into your house.
I like that. I like it.
Although in corporate America, you get all kinds of cookies free anyway.
True. Yeah. If you go in the office, there's always something free.
There's always something. Always too much, right?
Yeah. So Dana, what about you?
Well, it'll come to no surprise to you guys. I'm going to go back to my study abroad program, and my good friend Kelly Ogden, who was the professor there. And it, paralleling some of the things Bob was saying, it was a good blend of experiential learning and this guy was funny. I mean, he knew his stuff, but he had a good sense of humor. And then there was also a good social component. So, for example, on the social component, they gave us, the students, a list of 100 things to experience. And you weren't, the thing was you had to go in at least groups of 4, right? So people were always going off in groups of 4 and doing stuff around particularly around Jerusalem. We went to Yad Vashem, groups of 4 or 6, and that's the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And then, go to just a variety of things, variety of places in the old city. There was one experience, go and eat pie at Don't Pass Me By Pie. It was like, okay, well, we can do that. And then what was interesting is when we'd get together toward the end of the day, because there was a kind of a common cafeteria that we would eat at, but everybody would say, well, where'd you guys go today? Where'd you guys go today? So you kind of got a feel for the places you definitely wanted to hit, and you didn't. And you got to talk about them. Those 100 experiences, there was a list of 100, and I think we were supposed to do like 50 of them or something. But those experiences were great because, again, they were social. They were in the environment, right? Mm-hmm. So you're interacting with people from that culture. And then you'd come back and you talk about them. So there'd be some almost not decompressing, but you do the reflection on it, right, in some way. So that was part of it. And then the other part about studying and then experiencing, I mean, we would spend a week studying a particular area, a region of the country. For example, we did some study about Egypt, and then we hopped in the buses and went down there, right? And then after studying it for a week and then going there and then having the professor say, yeah, oh, yeah, remember when we studied this or that or the other thing? Again, the visual aids are just phenomenal. You can see it on a PowerPoint, right? Or you can see a pyramid. Bob's been there, right? You can see the pyramids at Giza on a PowerPoint. You go, those are pretty big. And then you actually go there and you go, those are pretty big. And then you crawl inside, right? And then you go, it really stinks in here. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Well, because there's no air conditioning and no airflow, and there's lots of warm, sweaty bodies. Anyway, that probably too much on the experience end right there. But the combination of studying and then experiencing and then coming back and reflecting, I think that all of those elements really shaped a lot of who I am and a lot of the ways that I try to design training.
I think when I first met you, or early on when I first got to know you, I would say that was a very unique trait about you that you did really well. You would go have an experience. Either you would travel something with your kids, you would write about it, you would share about it, and then you'd immediately determine how does this relate to like our context or our work. I felt like that was one of the main things I learned about you pretty quickly. So I can see how that links.
Well, and it's funny because I may have shared this with you both before, but every time I take my kids on a kind of a culture trip or something, I will work up a little workbook ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, yeah, okay, guys, you got to work through this to earn the trip. So,
Right.
um,
So we
That's
both have
good.
that in common, the experiential, the engaging,
yeah,
and Dana, you're adding on that layer of the reflection, which is so important.
and the
Of
pre-study, right, with the
Yeah,
In the
books, right,
pre-study.
yeah,
Yeah.
which in some cases is really effective.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So mine's good, and it has a little bit of not necessarily bad, but I've started to kind of compare the bad when I think of my good, at least as I was reflecting. So, have you guys ever watched This Old House from PBS?
Sure.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay, it's been on for like I think 40 years or
Yeah,
something
at
like that.
least. Yeah.
yeah.
At
So if you
least,
watch the first episodes, is this really old house?
yes, exactly.
This now it's older house.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, and especially for those that are not in the United States, This Old House is it's a TV show that's on our public broadcasting network, and it's been around for a long time. They go and fix up a house. It's usually an old house. Most of the time, it's from like the Boston area because that's where they're at. They teach you about various things about the industry and how to do things and whatnot. So I picked them because I learned so much from them on how to be handy and various different things. But I would say the thing that I took away from them is how to be a great teacher. I took that a lot from many people, but I would say for their profession, I think it's very easy for them to be puffy chest and say, "Yep, I'm the expert general contractor. I'm the expert plumber. I'm the expert landscaper. I'm the expert woodworker." But they were not like that. They're not like that at all. They're almost excited to teach other people regardless of their level. And so as I think about that and think about some other experiences, I've noticed today especially, you'll see many thumbnails of videos that of experts in various fields that they'll say, "Stop doing it this way." It immediately is like makes me feel like they know it all.
And you're
They
an
don't
idiot.
care. You're an idiot. I know the most. And I will even, I'll call a little shout out to some of us, like I think some of our industry. I feel that's the case as well. There's individuals that like to disprove others who may not have the right answer or may not know the right answer. And some folks like to disprove it. And I think that the way I would frame it is that, one, we're in the education space, which I think is great. We're in the kind of profession that we have the ability to teach others and know how to do it. So I would take what they have done, which is it doesn't matter where you are, and just get excited that the fact that I just want to teach and help someone, support them, and I don't care what level they are. I shouldn't never be puffy chested. It's just get excited about how do I teach others, because by doing that, I get rewarded because I might be that little piece in their larger pie, right? That they've collected over time. So again, that's what I took away from those guys. I just think they're great teachers. They don't care what you come in from the skill level. They just want to make you do it better. And I think that that's what we can learn from all of us. But at the same time, I've been doing that. And I get excited whenever I can help someone learn anything and from whatever heck I know. It doesn't have to be in my field specifically, but even if it's some house handy thing that I can teach, I love that.
Well, Jake, and I think that's one of the reasons I really like this industry, is because in the career I had, I always found people willing to share what they knew, because there's this sense of common mission, if you will, of we want to help people be better at what they do, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want to help people grow their skills, grow their career. If you do these things well, you're going to impact their professional life, but you're also going to impact their personal life. And I just, that's one thing I really value about the learning industry, is that the people are so willing to share. I'm thinking particularly some of the consortia we were a
Mm-hmm.
part of, right? That were not driven by products, but were driven by a common mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to do gray, or you want to just go to the bad?
I could do either. Tell me which to do.
Let's go with the gray.
Okay, gray. So way back in the day when I worked for our little internal it was still Anderson Consulting back then, software company called Foundation, and worked on the learning team there. I actually developed, I did it single-handedly, it was assigned to me, a course called the Foundation Advanced Development School. So Foundation was basically a toolkit for building your business systems. And we had a basic course, which is what I spent most of my time doing, going around the world and delivering this course. But the advanced development course was, as it sounds, to develop, advanced skills in that. It's kind of the version 2.0. And I realized this is where it gets gray. Like, I wanted to try something related to what we were just talking about making it really experiential. So I developed a case study around this where clearly I'm making this for myself. You, in your role as a participant in this course, were a developer for a theme park called Arthurland, and you had to build a ride management system. So it would tell you like what rides were running and what were down, and you could actually shut down a ride, or you could bring it back up, or you could see how many people were on it, or things like that. It was like a really pretty fun, engaging activity.
Yeah.
And that part of it was good. Like, I really liked that part, and I think people really liked it. But I had this crazy idea because we needed to have the activity of doing the case study. And then we also had content that we needed to teach. We had to teach these new tricks that we wanted people to learn. I said, let's concentrate that second day to just be the lab. So it's a full unbroken experience, and you really feel like you're there and you really feel like you're working for this company. If we do it that way, we have to get all of the content done on day one. And this course was designed that it was only one instructor. So it was 8 hours of lecture, 8 straight hours of lecture. Oof. And the first pilot that we did, Richard,
that's better than melatonin.
Right, I know. Well, Richard Sugarman delivered it. I don't know if you guys ever knew Richard Sugarman.
I did, yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
Richard listens. Richard, if you do, hi. You should write
Shout
us.
out.
Yeah. He did a phenomenal job of presenting this content on the first pilot. But I remember him coming up to me afterwards and being like, this is a death march. I can't handle this. And I was watching the participants. It was awful. So I learned a very, very good lesson about what not to do. I don't even have to go into why that was such a terrible thing. But I tried something new. I learned something positive. I learned something negative. I adapted from there. We changed it around to make the course designed a little bit better. But that was an interesting gray thing because I definitely had egg on my face, but at the same time was able to turn that failure into a success.
And there was still something good that came out of it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
I like that. I like it. I'll share mine quick, Dana, because mine's pretty fast. I don't know why I keep thinking about handiwork things. I worked at an elementary school, part of the maintenance crew. The head maintenance guy, he did all the maintenance for all the different schools in the district, and I learned a lot from him. I actually used to. This is one of the things that I think was the positive side. He actually brought me along. I rode around in his truck, but he brought me along and he showed me that, like, I observed while he fixed stuff. And then immediately after that, he would let me do it. And so that was the great thing. Again, I still think of him as someone that I learned a ton that I can do here too. There's elements that I can do here. But what he didn't do well was when he gave feedback, it was harsh, like harsh. Like you had to have a thick skin because if you didn't do it right, whew, I mean, they say sailor mouth. He had one. So that's what. So in terms of the feedback, he gave feedback, but it wasn't great feedback. It wasn't very positive feedback. Eventually, I mean, I took it. It was one of those things where I'm like, whatever, I'll just deal with it because I knew how to talk back to him in a way that was somewhat not necessarily friendly, but in a way that did it. But he had that balance. He's like, he wanted to teach you, he wanted to bring you along, he wanted to show you, wanted to have you practice and then give feedback. It's just that he was awful at giving feedback. So I learned so much of the importance of making sure when you do bring someone along that is more of a novice, how do you give them experiences to stretch them, but ensure that when I'm giving feedback, I'm giving strong, like, constructive feedback so they can keep moving on, not want to, like me, want to cry and go home and sit in my bed all night, after. But that was my story. His name was Don. He did pass away, but he was I still think of him as someone, as a strong teacher, but at the same time, terrible feedback giver.
So if I understood that story right, you learned how to give bad feedback.
I mean, I learned how to give feedback, but bad feedback, just to make sure I never do it. Yeah.
It also probably gave you a perspective on receiving bad feedback from later on in your career.
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
So when you were working for me and I gave you feedback, you would go, "Yeah, that's just Dana."
Or you'd be like, "Man, he's a real jerk, but at least he's not Don."
Yeah, at least he's not
that bad.
He's not Don. He's not Don. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to do just one. It's a little more on the personal side rather than related to a specific project. But I think a bad experience that I had was, and I may have shared this before, but we had I'd been working with a company for many years, and I consistently, I'm going to puff my chest out. I consistently rated really good on all my individual projects, right? I mean, consistently, right up at the top bar.
Yeah.
And so annual review came, and I was feeling like, I did pretty good all the way along, and the person who was giving me my feedback sat in a different chair than he normally does. Normally, I would face the window and he would face the wall, but he had it set up so that I would face the wall and he would face the window. And he's giving me feedback, and at one point he waves his hand, and the supervisor came in, and he said, "Okay, Dan, I need to tell you something. You are an outstanding performer, but we can't give you an outstanding rating. In fact, we can never give you an outstanding rating again, and you should never expect to be promoted." It was like, okay, now it's time to start looking for a different job.
Yeah.
So after that feedback, which I think was a November timeframe, I told Julie, I said, right after the holiday, right after Christmas, I'm going to start looking for work. And it was shortly after that another person from a different part of the company called me up, because he'd worked with me, and he said, "Hey, I don't know if you're interested in switching jobs, but I'd really like you to come over and work for me." I did. I got a significant pay raise. I started getting my big, high ratings again, and I got promoted. So it was a bad story because it just really impacted me. And for several months until I actually made that switch, I was like devastated.
Yeah.
I was a good performer, and yet I was getting knocked at the knees saying, "Yeah, you're really good, and keep it up." But that was not very satisfying.
We can't give you what you want, or say what we think you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I understand there's lots of reasons, behind HR making silly decisions like that. But what I learned from that was I can take something that's kind of spiraling downward, and personally, I can recover from that.
Yeah.
Right. And I did. And the interesting thing is I've seen lots of people do that same type of thing where they've recovered from really challenging circumstances. And so I part of the reason I wanted to mention this was when we're in a training environment and we're teaching people, we don't know what their backstory is, right? I might have gone from that into a training session. I would not have thought about what I was being trained on at all, right?
Yeah.
And the trainer might have been like, "Oh, that cock guy, he's not paying attention at all. And it's like, loser." But I had a reason for being a loser because I was just told I was.
Yeah.
Right?
You felt like one. Yeah.
So I think we need to be sensitive to the reality that we don't have all the data on people when they come into a training session, and we need to have a little extra compassion on them. So that's my bad.
Wow.
I mean, I was going to say I love that story, even though I feel like I shouldn't say that. That sounds like I shouldn't love.
I
a bad
learned a lot
story.
from it. I learned
But you learn-
resilience.
but I do love the last point you made, and I feel very strongly about, especially if it's, let's say, an in-person training environment,
yeah.
or and you guys know me, I focus a lot on team-based learning, and that's another thing of when you are trying to teach someone and they may not be in that space
Right.
at all. There could be something completely happening outside that they're just not in that mode to have any cognitive abilities to try to learn what you are trying to teach.
And I really like the concept of we don't have all the data, right? We don't know the backstory of everybody who's in the class. And so we need to show compassion because we don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So
I'm just
anyway,
glad that story
was my
wasn't
bad.
about me when
It
you
was
started.
not about you, Bob.
When you started,
Guaranteed.
I thought, I had a supervisor who will go nameless, but his name was
B.O.B.
Rob.
Yeah.
So I had a talk with Julie, and then a couple months later I retired.
That is not how it all went down, for the record.
Yeah.
Well, I will pivot into my bag because there's some similarities there. Like my bad, I was sitting here thinking, like, what was the worst screw up that I had, and what did I learn from it? Because I think that's.
Oh wait,
that's really
weren't those the bads, or were those the grays?
We did the gray.
We did the gray.
Okay.
We had a good and
So
a gray.
I'll come back and do a bad then afterward.
Okay. Well, here's my story, and I realize we're going on long because we love talking about ourselves, which is great.
We'll go fast on the bads because I think we brought up a couple. Yeah.
So this is still back in my early career when I was working for Foundation, and it was for another course, but the technology here will probably not make sense to a lot of our younger listeners, but the software that we had ran on a digital VAX VMS system, which was a mini computer. It was basically like one big kind of a mainframe computer that multiple people would log into. And so you would install our Foundation software onto that machine that everybody would use. And, it had its own databases and content and all that kind of stuff. So when we did a course, we had to build a training environment where the database and the content and everything was set up to run a course. I was tasked, for some reason, I don't even know why I was tasked, with building the install tape for this environment. So the idea is you could take a tape, and it's a big tape, right? It's like kind of like the Death Star plans in Rogue One, one of these giant cartridges. And you could plug it into the computer, and it would install the Foundation software, and it would install our tech environment on top of it. And so I didn't even know how to do it. And I didn't ask anybody for help. I just took the install script from the actual software, and I said, oh, well, I think maybe I would do this. I think I would maybe write this. I think I would maybe write that. And I finished it. And then I was like, how do I test this? I don't even know how to test it. Well, it'll be okay. And I turned it in and I said, okay, we're done. This is great. And then I spent months of like waking up in the middle of the night with these fantasies of my boss is going to call me into her office and is going to say, we sent this out to a client and they tried doing it and it didn't work and you're getting fired. And I would wake up with a cold sweat, and then I would go back to work the next morning and I would just be like, oh, that's okay. Nobody's ever going to use that. So over the following weeks and months, like, I eased up a little bit. I relaxed. I was like, I guess that it works. I guess it's okay. And then one day I got a call from Bruce Abels, another shout out. I hope he's not listening because he's retired now. And he was working with me there. And he was like, did you do this install tape? And I was like, yeah. And he said, because it don't work. And I said, Bruce, I need your help because I'm about to have a panic attack because, and I explained the whole story to him. And Bruce is like, okay, this is fine. I'll work with you. we can make it work. And then Bruce called in somebody else, and we just spent like a few hours on the tweaks that we need to make. We tested it and we made it work. But I realized something about myself there, that number one, I am reluctant to ask people for help. And so I got a little self-awareness there. But the other thing that I realized is when I have that gut experience, when that fear kind of strikes me in the middle of the night, it's telling me something that I need to take action on. And so I try to wake up the next day and say, okay, maybe it's not quite as catastrophic as what I was thinking, but there's something that I need to do here. And so I'm going to take action on it. And that was probably one of the most valuable life lessons that I've learned from my entire career. So that was bad. But again, like the whole point of this is even the bad stuff,
Even the
shapes us
bad
as a
becomes the
professional.
good. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So
And Dana,
that's-
you had one more?
So the last one I did was really my bad. It wasn't my gray. But so I'll do
So
it
go to
gray.
the gray.
I'll
Go
go
to
to
gray.
gray, and I'll try and keep it quick. So when I was working at this major consulting company, I was working on a contract risk management course because we had a lot of contracts that are very pricey contracts that don't always go exactly the way they're supposed to go. In fact, it's regularly the case. At that time, it was regularly the case. I don't know if it still is. But so we were invited to create a course to help very senior leaders in the company understand better how to manage contract risk. So we had the person, like the guy that everybody acknowledged was the best at doing this stuff. He was our subject matter expert and reviewer, and he had one of his right hand persons was kind of our direct contact or intermediary. We developed a beautiful course. I mean, spectacular objectives. Every PowerPoint was meticulously created. You know, it was for senior level people, and we wanted to make sure everything was on track. The subject matter expert had reviewed the course several times, loved it. He just thought it was great. You know, we'd have a little bit of lecture, and then we'd have a little bit of storytelling, and we'd have a little bit of activity, and you know, all the things that we thought would make for a really good course. It was a 3-day course, and so we flew to Frankfurt to pilot it, and our instructor was that subject matter expert. And so the course began, and it was okay. You know, we had typical introductions and everything, and everybody was excited to be there, but it very quickly changed. And the way it changed was as soon as, I'm going to call him John, the expert, as soon as John started telling a story, everybody was focused in because they knew some of the backstory, and they were wondering, how did he resolve this major contract problem? How did he manage the risk? How did he get the contract rewritten? And then he'd say, okay, now we're going to, go into this, and he'd pull up a PowerPoint with some bullet points. Say, hey, but John, how about, what happened here or what happened there? What ended up happening is it ended up being 3 days of John telling stories. And so to me, it was gray because we had put so much effort into creating a beautiful course, and went through all of the reviews, and everything was great. But it ended up evolving into storytelling. Everybody loved the course. It got really high ratings, right? It was a pilot.
Yeah.
We did go back and rewrite it so that it was much heavier on storytelling, but the problem was going to be that this was not only going to be taught by him, it was going to be taught by others.
Right.
And so we had to, balance what we did. We added more stories. We trimmed back some of the lecture in favor of storytelling. We captured him on video telling some of the stories. So we introduced that element. So it was a great thing because, we put so much good effort into it, and it was basically redesigned on the spot.
Yeah. And what was his name again?
John.
John. Okay. John.
Air quotes.
Air quotes. John. Okay.
I thought maybe Johann in Frankfurt, but that's okay. Yeah.
Well,
I'm
I
all
was
about
asking because John was probably a great storyteller, which
He
clearly
was
the reason with the high
and he had the
scores.
experience. Yeah. Because if they'd say ask about some nuance or some detail, he'd go, oh yeah, and then pretty soon, boom, right?
Right.
And oh, by the way, John, you haven't told us the story about when you parachuted into this client over in the UK, and
Right.
oh, okay, well, yeah, let me tell you that story. Well, that was not even in our script.
Yeah.
Right. I'm all about the storytelling. as long as it's hitting the learning objectives.
Yep.
Right. But it sounds like that was the problem is
It was
he started going off
here,
on,
tangent.
Yeah.
It was squirrel.
Yeah.
Squirrel. Really interesting stories, but
Right.
it was, full of
Yeah.
switchbacks.
Yeah. Good
Oh, those are a good
experience.
one. All right, I'll bring us home. I'll go fast. In my career, I have done a lot in leadership development in some capacity. I have been connected and had my fair share of working with very senior leaders at a very early tenure. Very early tenure, starting with very, very senior leaders. And I would say the majority of them have been great to work with. Most of them have been really great. But the leaders that I would say, what I've learned a lot about leadership are those who were bad, who were not great to work with. And usually those individuals who were very senior were those that acted like their time was so precious that anything that I would ask or want to seek help with was looked at again beneath them, or I was beneath them because of my distance from them on the hierarchy, or I was talked down because of my position. And I've had plenty of that. But what I have learned from them, again, the bad and what can I take away from them? I've learned that I don't care how high I get, I will never, ever assume that my time is or that my time is so precious. And I think it's so important because back to that first story that I shared about the importance of being a teacher and the importance of showing someone that how you can help them and how you can care for them regardless, again, wherever you sit, that you can do it. And it doesn't matter where you sit. And it also, I would say the other second thing that it's helped me is that I've gotten more confident and more comfortable working with senior leaders because at the end of the day, what I've learned, everybody, mostly has the same body parts and things, like they're people. Like they have, they're just people at the end of the day. So I've been able to figure that out, how to work with them effectively. But that is my lesson of being in leadership development for so long and that. So,
Good story.
Yeah, that's great.
That's my simple, quick one.
It's great.
All right. Well, hey guys, thanks for doing that. I know we
I know,
ran
that was
long,
really
listeners.
great.
Sorry about that, but I thought it was a great discussion.
I know. I really want to follow up on that, but we're running out of time. But anyway.
Your experience in that field, which you have had a lot of experience in that field.
Well,
Bob has worked with lots of senior leaders. Yes.
Yes, I have. But here's what this is the parallel I wanted to draw is in my 10 years or so that I've been living out in Los Angeles, we've gotten to meet a fair amount of celebrities, like several, not a lot, but several celebrities. And what I find is the A-listers, the ones whose name, if I told you, you would be like, I totally know who that person is. They're super cool. They're usually, I'm painting with a broad brush, but they're usually like really down to earth and really friendly and really super cool. It's the B-list people who aren't. Those are the ones who act like the leaders that you're talking about. And I think it's all about confidence. Those people haven't achieved it yet, so they need to feel like they're more than. So they're going to treat you less than. And I think that's what we see in leaders. So
yeah, no, it's a great point. And again, I think I've had more of the positive than I have the negative. Yeah. But I've learned a lot from that the negative enough to where I felt like I can really truly add it as a piece onto my whole. So
amazing. This was great. Good
idea,
really
Jake.
Good. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Star Wars, for helping be inspired by it.
As always, the one true source of inspiration. Thanks to you guys for sharing. That was really fun. A nice little vulnerable moment, but hopefully it's good for our listeners. So thank you to our listeners.
And hopefully John doesn't listen to this.
Hopefully John,
Sorry, John.
We've got a whole list of people who we do want to and don't want
Don
to
can listen to it, but Don's dead, right?
Yeah, so. Don died, he can't hear. He'll probably be swearing at me anyway, so it's fine.
So thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode of the Learning Geeks podcast. And until then, go learn something, would you? We'll see you soon. Bye.
Say bye.
Thanks, everybody.